Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly detailed, purely data-driven piece of research. We're going to impartially look at the findings of a massive international meta-analysis that compares the medical risks between two distinct abortion methods. As with all of our explainers, we are entirely focused on the data here. We're stripping away the noise to look strictly at what the clinical research tells us. Understanding these complex statistical findings is absolutely crucial because, it directly impacts everyday healthcare protocols and how patients actually understand their options. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with analyzing the global data, then look at serious adverse events, move into total complication rates, check out emergency department utilization, and finally wrap it up with the meta-analysis conclusion.
All right, Section 1, Analyzing the Global Data.
Just to make sure we're completely clear right out of the gate, let's define our terms. The data we're looking at compares medical abortions, which are medication-based procedures, against procedural abortions, which are surgical interventions. So throughout our discussion today, whenever we say the medical route, think medication. And when we say the procedural route, think surgery. Now, to make sure they had a truly robust sample size, the researchers synthesized large cohorts from multiple, very diverse international regions. We're talking data from California, Ontario, South Australia, and a massive 17-state sample from the US. And this is important because when data holds true across so many varied healthcare systems, that statistical signal becomes incredibly hard to ignore. Moving right along to Section 2, Serious Adverse Events and Major Complications. The researchers were super strict when defining this group. They intentionally excluded any minor issues or basic clinical reinterventions. Instead, they isolated the outcomes to only include major hospitalizations, life-threatening events, and required major surgeries. The big takeaway here is that we are looking purely at true, undeniable medical emergencies. So what did the data actually show? Well, according to the pooled findings from North American data, specifically studies by Liu, Ray, and Upade, the research yields a pooled odds ratio of 1.90. In straightforward terms, an odds ratio of 1.90 means women undergoing the medication-based medical abortion are nearly twice as likely to experience a serious, life-threatening adverse event or a major complication compared to those going the surgical route. But check this out. There's a really interesting dynamic in how local healthcare systems impact the data. A South Australian study conducted by Mulligan in 2011 reported a 15.25 odds ratio for hospital admission alone. Obviously, that specific number is a major outlier, but it tells us that localized clinical practices and strict definitions of hospitalization can vary wildly around the world. But crucially, even as an outlier in its sheer size, it is entirely directionally consistent with the rest of the pooled data. The risk profile is definitely notably higher for the medical cohort. Okay, Section 3, Total Complications and Adverse Event Rates. When we zoom out a bit to include minor complications that still required some form of clinical intervention, say hemorrhage that didn't quite require a transfusion, the gap actually widens. Synthesizing all this data yields a pooled odds ratio of 2.91. That means the risk of experiencing literally any form of clinical complication is nearly 3 times higher for the medical abortion cohort compared to the procedural one. So you've got to ask, why is there such a massive gap? Remember, data isn't just abstract numbers. It reflects physical realities. The researchers were able to isolate the specific clinical driver here. The main reason for this nearly threefold increase is the need for follow-up surgical reinterventions, specifically a D&C, which is a surgical clearing of the uterine lining required due to retained products of conception. Essentially, the medication route frequently ended up requiring a surgical follow-up just to safely complete the process. And when you dig into the specifics, it's pretty wild. That same Mulligan study from 2011 revealed that the medical cohort was an astounding 28.7 times more likely to require that surgical reintervention. That staggering figure really hits the nail on the head as to why the total complication rates heavily skew towards the medication-based pathway. Which brings us to Section 4, Emergency Department Utilization. This category is absolutely vital because analyzing ER visits allows researchers to distinguish between general healthcare-seeking behavior and direct procedure complications. And they noted a really clear disparity. While all-cause ER visits are basically comparable between the two groups, hovering at an odds ratio between 1.05 and 1.22, visits specifically tied to an abortion-related concern paint a different picture. For those, we're seeing a pooled odds ratio of 1.53. That's a consistent 53% increase in the odds of visiting the ER specifically for a complication following a medical abortion. Now, the whole reason researchers separate these two types of visits is to completely rule out patient psychology. If all-cause visits were drastically higher, well, you could argue that women who choose medical abortions are just more anxious, maybe more prone to visiting the for any little thing. But because the all-cause visits are so similar, and only the abortion-related visits spike, the meta-analysis explicitly suggests this widened gap is a direct physical consequence of the medical abortion process itself. It's not just a difference in general health-seeking behavior. Finally, Section 5, synthesizing the findings for the meta-analysis conclusion. Before we wrap up with the final numbers, we absolutely have to talk about statistical power. The data here indicates absolute statistical significance. In statistics, if a confidence interval overlaps with 1.0, which is the null value, it means there might actually be zero difference at all between the two things you're comparing. But here, across all outcomes, the confidence intervals for medical abortion consistently do not overlap with the null value. And on top of that, they don't overlap with the lower rates seen in procedural abortions either. That tells us this is a mathematically robust finding. So let's put it all together. Synthesizing this entire data journey reveals a really consistent pattern. Serious adverse events, nearly 2 times higher. Total complications, nearly 3 times higher. And specific abortion-related visits are 53% higher. It's a consistent pattern that holds up across different continents, entirely different healthcare systems, and different severities of complications. So what's the bottom line? The meta-analysis ultimately concludes, backed by robust and diverse data, that the medication-based procedure carries a significantly higher risk profile across the board when compared to the surgical option. Whether you're looking at minor retained products requiring a quick intervention or serious, life-threatening events, the comparative data points in one single, unified direction. And leaving you with this totally objective look at the statistics, it brings up a pretty critical question about the real-world application of all this research. When empirical data reveals such a clear disparity in risk profiles between two common medical procedures, how will these global findings influence the way healthcare protocols are written? And maybe even more importantly, how are they going to shape the conversations around patient-informed consent moving forward? It's definitely a question that healthcare providers and policymakers are going to have to navigate very closely. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this breakdown gave you a clear, structured understanding of the research.